Okay, so thank you so much for joining this session today, where I hope that we're gonna start, and I say start with this intention, just start very interesting conversations because there is a lot to do, and we are just at the beginning of what I hope are going to be important reflections to think about how mental health should be reframed. And I say mental health. And I really want to make a point here so that we all understand what I mean by mental health. Because I am a psychologist, and of course, you can think that mental health practitioners are psychologists, where actually mental health is in hands of many more people. Of course, we have the pediatricians, the teachers, the guiders, like all those that are perhaps around the developmental years, right? But there are also all of these other professionals, interculturalists, leaders, managers, all these other people that are around people and that are also impacting their mental health. So, of course, as mental health professionals are much more equipped, but I do think that this content is something that can help us to see how this balance that we are all seeking is actually something that has to do with many more people and with many more subtle strategies than we may think. So, in order to start a little bit kind of putting you in the background of this project, the content that I'm sharing with you today is not something that comes only of my own almost 20 years of practice and my own almost 40 years of life globally mobile experiences, but also from all these professionals that, like me, have a common interest that it is to make much more visible the impact of global mobility and to make sure that we validate the impact that it's having on a more emotional level. We have those that study the impact that it has on finances. We have those that have a study on how it's impacting, of course, this global warm change and all these different aspects with nature, but we are here to talk about how is it impacting some of the invisible layers of each of us that is resulting in very scary percentage of mental health problems globally. So just for you to know that the content that I'm presenting today comes out of an interviewing process of all of those and many more that were part of this research to find these best practices that can be lifelong and that can really help people to feel much more understood and supported. But that I'm very, very happy to say that Ivana and Matthew is a professor at a university in Canada, are preparing a white paper so that those of you that perhaps are more interested in data written content, this paper will be available for you soon as well. So, having said that, what I aim to share with you is that the content that I am sharing today is built from life that lived in movement, okay? And it is designed for life that are still moving or experiencing mobility. Because as you will see, it is not only the people that move that are experiencing the challenges and the impact of mobility, but also those that are receiving and those that are left behind with each move. So we think that every successful, right, and useful method is born from a necessity, a context, and of course, mistakes, right, that have been addressed. And these are a little bit kind of our method, what we think has helped us and has been built out of the necessity and the context of global mobility. So what we are sharing, of course, is I would say as useful for those that are professionals, as we were saying, educators, psychologists, coaches, also parents, right, that are kind of experiencing this global mobility, but also those that are in the first place, kind of the result of this global mobility. We really hope that is gonna help you give a little bit of meaning and to gain some vocabulary that may help you to process the impact that we see global mobility is having on all of us as a society. So everything starts, of course, as we were saying, out of a necessity, right? And as we said, the people that we interviewed, and me included as part of the people that participated in the research, we have experiences on both sides. We help people that are experiencing global mobility and we accompany them emotionally, but we have also been on this other side as patients, trying to figure out, trying to understand how mobility has shaped us in a possible way. And believe it or not, there is this question, right? Where are you from? That comes so often in so many different scenarios. Can be a training, can be a therapy session, can be a coaching session, right? Just tell me about where are you from, right? Can be just, I don't know, at the embassy when we are asking for some papers or any place where something doesn't quite fit and there is this need to get clarity, right? To have this information. But where are you from? And sometimes for the population that I'm going to share with you very, very soon, it is a very difficult question to answer because the population that we're talking about and that is increasing doesn't necessarily feel belonging to one geographical location or identify with one single passport. So it is a little bit more complex, and we need to understand that what perhaps was something that was, I don't know, very exotic in the past is starting to become a bigger and bigger norm. So it's time that we start thinking about it. So just for you to get an idea, Ruth Van Recken developed this model that I apologize a little bit blurry in 1987. So that's 38 years ago. And she was looking at a model that had already been started by Ruth Uzzian, where they were looking at what it is known as third culture kids. Third culture kids, but in this traditional way. What traditional TCKs look like are people that develop in different countries with a multicultural environment and with disruptive changes. So, for instance, the foreign services were mobilized around the globe and taken with their families to have services abroad, and their children were developing in multicultural environments where they were experiencing all these comes and goes from other foreign services families, and they had a very clear date of return, and then off you go again. Corporate children were having similar situations, so did missionaries, militaries, educators, believe it or not, international teachers, right? Technical aid workers, just like NGOs or all the humanitarians going on the field to try to help with a natural disaster or any other thing. We're also there on the field and we're experiencing these impacts of multicultural environment, culture shock, climate change, etc., etc. And then in this media represented, right, there were all these representatives that were like all these reporters, for instance, and so on. But I would like to add to this group, actually, with the permission of Ruth Van Recken, that they're also the football players, the tennis players, the athletes of all these different games that are also mobilized from one team to another, and all the artists that are just taken on board on a project in India and then down to South Africa and then up the north of Carolina. And of course, they all of them have their own institutional bubble, so to say, but they are confronted to these different realities, different cultures, and most importantly, to what we will see that are multiple disruptive changes. What we see is that one third of the TCK move over 10 times before age 18. That just gives you an idea of the amount of disruption that comes with all these changes happening repeatedly during their developmental years. So what Ruth Van Reken actually continued looking into was like, okay, so this is a collective of people that are moving, and of course they're part of many people's life, right? We may have a friend that is a diplomat. We may have a friend that is a child of a CEO. We may have perhaps family members in the military services. But are they actually the only one that are experiencing the impact of mobility? For them, it's crystal clear, and there is something that is shared by these groups, is that they'll have a return date, or at least there is this intention of returning back after the project or the mission is finished, right? But what about all these other collectives? What about those that are moving, but not necessarily internationally, but that are still experiencing mobility, changing schools from one village to the other because my parents decide to change, or my grandparents are growing older and we have to move to take care of them? What about these international adoptees that they're not going abroad because of their parents' job? They're getting parents in this new country. What about the refugees and the migrants that are choosing sometimes to get better options and other times are just trying to survive in a different culture, in a different country? What about all these borderlanders, right? All these children that, for instance, are growing in France, but are constantly exposed to the Swiss culture or to the German one or to the Belgium one, right? What about those that come from a mixed heritage or by multilingual families? What about those? Aren't they also exposed to the impact of global mobility in a certain way? Aren't these international adoptees confronted with culture shock? Aren't they missing their origins? Aren't these multicultural children experiencing the challenges of dealing with one parent to say one thing and the other one that says completely different things, and going back and forth to the country where the grandparents are, and being misunderstood because they don't, for instance, master the language enough? Aren't they also being impacted by this global mobility? The answer is yes. So this is how the cross-cultural kits came about. But the reality is that as much as the child is impacted by it, of course, much more profoundly because it's happening during their developmental years, we've seen that global mobility is also impacting those that experience it as adults. Of course, it has a different impact in the core of the development of the person, but you are probably familiar with the reverse culture shock. Reverse culture shock is just this experience of the person that has experienced mobility and is returning into a culture that no longer feels the same. So I think this is a very important topic that we need to address urgently because nowadays there are hundreds of millions of migrants that are part of our lives. One in every 25 people has experienced international move or multicultural upbringing or works in multicultural environments where there are international people. And it is expected that this percentage will just keep increasing. By 2030, it is expected to be 40% of the global population. So that means that very soon, every person in this room, right, probably already knows someone that has lived or been shaped by migration, but it's going to be a norm. It's going to be beyond those that are sensitive to what I'm talking, and you're here with me listening today. It's going to be the rule. It's going to be for everyone. So it is urgent to understand that global mobility not only is shaping the life of those that are leaving, but they're also shaping those that are staying behind. Those that are at the departure, the parents, the siblings, the friends, right? All these communities that are going to stay behind. And all of those parents and siblings and friends and communities that are going to be receiving them in the other side of the move. So it is super important to understand that what we're talking about is not only giving credit to what is happening to those that have chosen or happen to experience global mobility, but to take global mobility as something that we need to take into account when choosing our practices, our interventions, our support systems. We cannot care for modern lives with outdated models. We can't because it is not having an effect. Actually, what we know is that international mobility is coming with a very high price that we are all paying. As I said, not only those living, but also those staying and those receiving. When we look at research, of course, there is a lot of research that looks into those people that are expatriated, right? And they try to find out why. Well, this global mobility, of course, has a workforce impact in the first place. 7 in 10 of them move for work. And it can be because they are part of those collective we mentioned before, but it can be because they are looking for a better job opportunity, looking, as we were saying, to perhaps survive in a different country. But if we don't understand that this workforce is being impacted by the mental health states of the workers, we're not going to gain the actual impact that it can have, the actual potential that there is, especially when talent is globally mobile at this point. So if we see the research telling us that 8 out of 10 expatriate report mental health symptoms at work, this should be something that alert us. But what it is even more concerning is that 62% of them say that their condition is poorly managed. And there is where the content of this webinar is essential. Why? Why is it poorly managed? Well, because we fail to understand what is at the core of their symptoms. Mobility has a transgenerational cost. We know that 74% of TCKs, those traditional, highly mobile communities, experience at least one adverse childhood experience throughout their childhood. And for those that are not familiar with the adverse childhood experiences, this includes having parents that are suffering from mental health problems, from the consume of drugs, that are being violent or emotionally neglecting their children, sexually abusing them. They may be experiencing incarceration or very harsh, violent act. This can be direct to themselves or also could be what we call vicarious trauma, which is to experience trauma through something happening to somebody else. And we need to understand that those TCKs, these traditional TCKs, are not the only one that are experiencing global mobility. Adverse childhood experiencing are multiplying the risk of depression, anxiety, substance abuse when they become adults. We need to think that the research comes from 38, even more years ago. So they started looking at them, but those have become parents. And as we saw in the CCK, in the cross-cultural child model of Ruth Van Recken, they are now a larger population. It is more and more of us that are confronted to the challenges of multicultural environments and global mobility, which means that all these adverse childhood experiences are much more likely to be part of many more children nowadays, multiplying the risk of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and relational difficulties in adulthood. So if we take into account this context where adults are in survival mode, right? Because they are adjusting too. They have left their references, their routine, all their network behind to come, yes, with a hope, with a dream to perhaps improve their financial or their financial conditions or their careers. Great. But they're not being prepared. They're not being told how to deal with the impact of global mobility. So they are holding on unhealthy strategies and they are leaving children emotionally neglected. They are landing in the hands of professionals that are unprepared and therefore unable to provide adequate care, just leading us to the 62% of non-successful interventions. But if we take that to a clinical setting or to an educational board where we are measuring and putting labels, diagnosing people on monocultural and outdated manuals that do not contemplate the impact of global mobility and multicultural environment, we're just handing false diagnosis. And what is even worse, wrong medication. And this is especially dangerous because we don't have transferable health records. We keep moving people around the globe and we do not follow up on their prescriptions because we don't follow standardized measures. We all look at what we have been told. We are not even trained the same way across the globe. All our participants were just sharing how amazing the diversity of our training were and how we are meant to know how to treat someone that comes from a completely different background, starting with the point that they had completely different expectations of what a teacher should do, what a mental health provider should do, what a leader should do. And this is leading to disrupted care and, what is most important, missing resources. We are not giving the people the resources to fully adapt, to have access to their full potential. And then more and more people are becoming unwell. Mental health percentages are just growing every year. And this has one core common ground, and that is that we have more and more people that are feeling misunderstood, that are not understanding themselves, how global mobility is impacting them, and how they need to take it into account in their practices. So in order for you to get kind of a general idea, and I apologize because apparently my slide has moved a little bit, the text, there are some layers of the losses that come with global mobility that are very obvious, right? Some of them are the language, the culture, the professional status, educational system, perhaps, social network, political or bureaucratic, right, way of handling a country, safety, climate. There are some of them that are quite obvious, and actually, they are at the core of many interventions that have been starting to be developed in order to help more and more professionals that are experiencing and expressing those visible and external losses. We have every time more onboarding programs with interculturalists, for instance, trying to tell about cultural distance and how to help each other to feel a little bit more understood. We're trying to have mentors in international schools, having to help the children that are new arrivals. We are having more and more, especially institutions for those that are newcomers and that come from backgrounds that are very poor, so with very little resources. But we are forgetting in every of those settings the internal and invisible layers. We fail to ask in an onboarding program, hey, how's your wife? How is your family roles changed with this next move? How is the cohesion? How are you guys feeling? How is your sense of belonging feeling to this community, to how we handle things? How much do you trust the system? How were your past experiences being relocated? What about your identity? How is this next move impacting who you are becoming, what you think about yourself, your values. How are all these emotional, invisible states? Because each move change who you are. And we are failing to see that when moving people abroad. So let me just try to shake a little bit this conversation and ask you a question. Why would you say working with them in therapy or in coaching or teaching them or mentoring them is any different? How is it to work with a population that has experienced global mobility? So to say, let's take, for example, an international team from an international company where there are, of course, many people from different countries coexisting and co-working on a project, but some of those are in their home country. That's where they grew up, that's where they developed, and now they just happen to be part of this team. And some of those are not. Some of those are new arrivals. They're just landing. They just left everything behind to be there for that project that they believe in as much as the national or the person from the country is. Why is it any different to work with them in this international setting? Well, let me tell you something. We know that global mobility, right, comes with uncertainty. And we know, as we were saying, that global mobility is not something new. It's something that has existed with us for many, many generations. That means that at some point, this second point over here, this restlessness, can have become part of the person's way of living. Because uncertainty and movement and change has become the norm. So, yes, I'm sorry to say, there may be something to blame on technology and dopamine and need for fast change. I can take that, but I do think that global mobility takes a very big part in it as well. Especially if we think about it as something that has never been explored or supported before, something that has been very much localized on certain collectives that were having a very specific way of mobility. This restlessness is something that may have been interpreted in completely different ways and perhaps the wrong one. This change of partners, of work, of career, of location may be at the core of a person that developed moving, that developed in an environment where all these changes were happening constantly and became part of their norms. And just as a person would crave something that helps their brain to feel safe because they know how it feels, uncertainty and restlessness can be normalized. And we can get used to this survival mode and turn it into the life mode. So we need to see those people having all these hybrid and fluid cultural identities and fragmented life stories as an increasing part of our population. A population that until today they have been normalizing all these invisible losses, all those losses, all those changes, all those layers that are internal and that have not been validated or even outspoken by anyone. So accumulating towers of unsolved grief. They are a population that delay the seek for support or help due to guilt. Many of them, especially from the traditional groups, they chose this lifestyle. It's something that they decided. How come are they gonna dare to say that is hard? To say that is impacting them in so many ways that they can't even explain because nobody has given them the vocabulary. Sometimes they delay it because they don't have the emotional vocabulary to explain it. Some others, unfortunately, they have a very vulnerable economic dependence that does not allow them to seek support in things that can be as drastic as very harsh domestic violence. It is also a population that has become professionals in masking. They have developed strategies to just cover it up, suck it up, as some of my patients say it. Disconnected from the brain, from the body. Let's just use the brain. That's what we're paid for. That's what is useful. That's what is going to get us to the next response, to the next good decision. This is how we are seeing it at this point. I would appreciate that everybody can mute themselves so that it is not disrupted in the audio. Thank you so much. So we see that is a population that it is trying very hard to just keep up the job, to just do what they are expected to do, but very, very often are forgotten to connect and validate themselves how hard it is. The darker side of mobility, the darker side of this multicultural life that they're exposed to. So one of the things that is very important to remember is that especially those that come from a highly mobile environment, they're going to be having very high towers of ruptures, of goodbyes, of closures that, as we were saying before, in many cases has not been properly guided, properly addressed. So when it comes to closing programs or sessions or classes with them, we need to take into account the impact of global mobility. So how can we support them better, right? This is why you're all here. What are those life-lasting strategies that we can all apply as from today? We can already start changing the way we support them, the way we guide them. Well, the first one is not any technique, it's actually looking at them from these new lenses. It's looking at the person in front of us, considering the possibility of global mobility being among all these different layers that have impacted them, that are at the core of the symptoms that they are presenting, of their demand that they are sharing with you. Then, of course, there is the need to create a safe place, a safe space. And everything starts with listening without judgment. We know, especially certain groups that are known for going to international schools, having access to a chauffeur, perhaps having trips back home every Christmas, are internationally known as so privileged and lucky. But how hard do you think it is for a child to say goodbye every Christmas to their grandparents, every summer to their classmates that they're not going to share the summer with, they're not going to join the same summer camp because they are going back home? And I'm quoting that because home may feel very different for a person that experienced global mobility. But neither go for the how hard was that? Because perhaps the person enjoyed what you consider difficult and found difficult what you thought was easy. So avoid shutting responses like, oh, you'll see, they'll adapt, children are resilient, don't worry, it'll be fine. You'll see once you're there, everything will be fine. Because the truth is that the uncertainty is there and you don't know. And by just saying that everything will be fine, you're kind of inserting a sentence that the person needs to believe. And we just join all these others that the person is already telling themselves to shut their emotion down. Okay, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. I'll be fine. I'll be fine. But are you? So giving space and time to name emotions and reconnect them with the body and to access all those forbidden emotions that they have been told for years that they don't have the right to experience, because they should be privileged, because they should be appreciative of everything that have been given to them. Give them the permission to access the rage, the sadness, the feeling of completely hopelessness that they may have experienced. Listen beyond the words. I'm speaking in English today, or I hope that it sounds like English, but unfortunately, my words may mean completely different things to all of you. We have different nationalities, different countries in the room today, and I am quite sure that we could have a very long discussion over what some words mean to you, with your background, with your context, with your experiences around that word. Make sure that you avoid questions that are oversimplifying, like, where are you from? Oh, come on. You can choose a place. Where were you born, for instance, or what your passport is. Try to replace those by tell me your story. Tell me perhaps how many places in the world do you feel like home? Accept and remember that nowadays there is no such thing as one unique way of feeling at home. There are so many different ways that a lot have been shaped by global mobility. And as much as self-disclosure has been proven and shown by all my colleagues that it is a great tool, because if you can share an experience with a person, this can have the effect of the person opening up, because you will connect on a level of the impact of mobility. Be very, very prudent and careful to not turn your story or the story of the patient you're sharing as the story. For example, if you've been to Mexico and you had your experience in Mexico, share it just as yours. Well, I've been to Mexico and this is what happened to me. That was hard for me and this was cool and this is what I took from it. What's your story? Tell me what's your story, because it might be different to mine. And then I think it's super important to understand that is a population at that, as we were saying, they cut off their networks in many, many ways. And we become the teacher, the coach, the psychologist, the doctor, the caregiver, the chauffeur. We all become part of this new network that receive them, that are there to support them, that are creating that safe space to talk about their emotions. And it is also part of this additional layer of complexity of this mobility, right? To help them to develop this network outside the room, okay? To help them map the losses, okay? And see outside, okay, these only opportunities that they got from going to these new places, and also make sure that we address the opportunity losses. Opportunity losses, for instance, to graduate with their classmates that they had been together for 4 years. The opportunity to get the driving license at the same age as their cousins do. The opportunity losses of being there the day that their parent die. Being there for the birth of a nephew. There are opportunity losses as much as opportunities in global mobility. And there are some of them, as we were saying, that are much more invisible, that have to do with this identity. And one of them is just kind of going from being an outsider or a foreigner in a country and then landing in another one where you're completely invisible, a complete chameleon, because ethnically, racially, language wise, all of those match the country where you go. And all of a sudden, nobody sees that you are adjusting, that there's so many things that match your environment and so others that on the inside don't. So validating all this multiple belonging, all those invisible and hidden losses, adapting our assessment, please extend the timelines beyond the monocultural manuals until research catches up and provide us with curves that we can measure that have been created with multicultural population and mobility taken as a variable into account. If you want to stay updated on the publication and the progress of all this work, I encourage you to fill up this little form, okay? And I will be sharing with you whether there is perhaps a podcast we're thinking about, perhaps giving more content on all these different tools and strategies that we have also put into different life stages for all these different population. Also explaining a little bit more specific tools for this population, explaining how, of course, the body keeps the score, and we can also learn how to identify and navigate certain things that may be invisible to the mind but not to the eye. So trying to also capture these, it's something that you can have a follow-up if you just register in this form. Thank you very much for your attention, for your participation. I'll be stopping the recording now, and I remain available via email for those of you that are watching this recorded. Thank you very much for your attention.